The Institute of Leadership and Management recognises great leadership as being multidimensional. We identify 5 dimensions: authenticity, vision, achievement, ownership and collaboration. We've broken down those 5 dimensions into 49 components, which enable us to organise our resources in such a way as to help individuals access the leadership development that is immediately relevant to them. This video introduces developing strategy, part of the dimension of vision.
So I'll be looking at developing strategy, focusing on 3 parts of that: the strategic planning process, the sorts of models that you might use in order to help and assist you in developing your plans, and then what we mean when we talk about strategic thinking. Because visionary leaders inspire people to action and achievement by helping to define the destination and co-create the journey to get there. Now, this slide has a fairly conventional model showing the whole strategic planning process, and so much, as you can see from the arrows, are interconnected, interrelated. Very unusual to be able to start with a blank sheet. Nevertheless, stepping back, thinking about what our goals are, absolutely important, because they will change, and indeed they should change. And there's 2 important things when we're thinking about our goals: is what's going on outside the organisation. What are those external factors that are impacting our business over which we have no or little control? What do we have inside the business? So what's going on inside the business that's important and affecting how we achieve those goals? What is our business capable of achieving? What sort of resources do we have? And those resources might be financial, which enable investment in new and different resources. Nevertheless, there will always be some constraints as to what we're actually able to deliver with the resources we have available. Then, when we've identified the goals, taking all those factors into account, there will be different ways of achieving them, different routes to the same destination. And to assume that there's only one is an error. Let's think of different ways of achieving the same outcome, and then make the strategic decisions which then feed into the goals, always thinking about how we're doing and what's going on outside. So it's a complicated process, and you can understand why for so long so many people, and still do, take an awful lot of time in developing their strategic plans, because they need to assess, find out, research what's going on at the moment, what is the current situation, and keep revisiting the mission. Are we still doing what we set out to do? What we set out to do, is that the right thing for today's environment? So what do we want to achieve? How will we need to change the way we operate in order to be the sort of organisation we want to be? How much is that going to cost? And all the time that sense checking. Is it feasible? Is it realistic, what we're trying to do? And then the how. What sort of processes will we need, further plans, and what sort of people are we going to need in order to be able to make all this happen? And once we've decided what our plan is, how are we going to ensure it's happening, that we're being successful, whether it was the right decision, or maybe if we made poor decisions, how are we going to know about that, and what are we going to do something about them? So there are a lot of strategic models that we can use to help with this process. Some of the more sophisticated ones, the balanced scorecard, that's been around for a long time and was very, very popular at one point. Its popularity has faded somewhat, but it's still a terrific tool. McKinsey's 7S framework, Porter's 5 forces model, SWOT analysis, pestle analysis, and I'll talk about each of those in a bit more detail. But the whole field of strategic planning has been so influenced by Michael Porter. And at the heart of his thinking was the idea about being competitive, being better than the people around you, and benchmarking yourself all the time with what's going on outside the organisation, to keep reminding yourself not to be too inward looking. So Porter's 5 forces model, which he's probably most famous for, It's brilliant because it helps you look at the attractiveness of a market or an industry. So it's not about an individual firm, it's about a collection of firms that are together make up an industry or a market, and where the power is there. Is it with the customers? Is it with the suppliers? How easy is it to join this industry? How many new competitors are you likely to have? And are there new products on the horizon that will act as substitutes for what you're making and might actually mean you're no longer in business? The 7S framework, great way of remembering all the things that you have to think about when you're thinking about strategic planning. Not only the structure of the organization, how you're going to do it, the systems you need, the skills, the style, the approach you're going to take, the staff, and what we've heard about so much more recently, what the values are. What are those values that are shared by the people who work there and what the organization says it stands for? SWOT analysis is very popular. Most people have heard of it, but when used well, it can be so insightful. Essentially, the strengths and weaknesses are what we're good at, what we're not so good at, what are our internal capabilities or deficiencies. Whereas the opportunities and threats is when we look outside the organization and say, well, what's out there is going to be potentially harmful, the threats, or what opportunities are there that we can take advantage of. One would never think to use one of these models or tools in isolation, because together they're going to give a much better picture than we over rely on one. Pestle analysis, which has become steeple analysis, every time somebody finds a new model that somebody else thinks of a way of improving it. And this is looking outside the organization at all the factors that affect the environment in which the organization operates. So they might be political, economic, sociological. There'll be technology that's impacting, as we know so well, legal issues, environmental issues. And as I say, that's been expanded into steeple. And let's think much more about ethical business, that those important shared values that I just mentioned. The balanced scorecard reminds us that financial performance isn't the only criterion by which we should measure an organization's success, because in order to maintain that success, it's got to be efficient, it's got to have high quality internal processes, which mean great people working there. And we also need to know what our customers and other stakeholders think of us. So the balanced scorecard, great reminder of all the things we need to think about when we're actually measuring performance. I mentioned Michael Porter and how much of a contribution he's made to strategic planning and to thinking about developing strategy. And one of his great contributions, in addition to the five forces model, was his talking about value chain. Whereas a value chain is a series of sequential steps that transforms raw materials and components into products. So every part of that journey, from a raw material to a finished product, value is being added. So being able to know where the most value is added and where we should be our most efficient, or where we've got most opportunity for delivering great results from that part of our value chain. Really important when you're talking about physical products. The thinking doesn't translate so well. So a value shop is another way of thinking about value chain analysis, but in terms of a service. And this is the sort of service which consultancy might be, where you have solutions that are being offered to problems, and it's the formulation of those solutions, the knowledge, the expertise that is needed in order to arrive at those solutions. So that's the value that you're selling. A value network, a great example of course is eBay. It's where they bring people together to buy and to sell, and it's the quality of the relationships that they're supporting that makes the model work, the value that they're adding. Whereas actually eBay doesn't own anything other than its ability to offer that network. And while the field of strategic management and the contributors like Porter and the McKinsey framework have been around for a long time and have obviously been found very useful by very many people, There have been criticisms that sometimes the planning and sticking to the plan becomes more important than what the plan's trying to achieve. Sometimes we lose sight of the customer. So a new school of thought has developed about planning called Agile planning, where the vision still very important, but the priorities of how you achieve that vision is recognize that they will change because circumstances change outside the organization. So agile planning is more flexible, more transparent, because more people have to know what's going on in order to be able to change and adapt, and much more iterative. So let's see what's happening, let's see what our priorities are, and maybe change the plan because we know that that's the right thing to do. Always keeping the customer and delivering value to the customer at the heart of what it is we're trying to achieve. And finally, a couple of definitions here of strategic thinking. Korzynski is saying that actually it's an intuitive ability to see everything all at once almost, whereas Walsh is focusing more on that bigger picture. It's so easy when we're caught up in the day to day with operational concerns that we forget the bigger picture. But that ability to stand back and to think about the organisation as a whole, markets, where they're going, what the trends are, how we're still going to survive in the long term as an organisation delivering a mission, is important work, and reminds us that sometimes the systems and processes, activities that we're engaging in now will disappear, but the vision, the mission might stay constant. So we'll be looking for new ways of solving the problems we have and taking advantage of opportunities to innovate and change the way we do things as an organisation in order, as I say, to deliver value to customers. So do have a go at the developing strategy scorecard, and then by completing the questionnaires, answering the statements as to whether you think they're true or false, meet the standard and receive your standard Met badge for developing strategy. Thank you very much for listening.